Return, O virgin daughter of Israel, to these your highways by which you went. Welcome to Reunion Roadmap, a place to discover the people and communities along the highway of restoration for Israel's house of Joseph. Reunion Roadmap is a B'nai Yosef North America production. Be our guest for the next hour as we meet the people of the emerging house of Joseph here in North America. Hello, this is Sophania Pappas with B'nai Yosef North America, and with me is Al McCarn, our executive director, and we're going to somebody who originally was north of the border, but now is living here in the United States, Dean Bai, whom you are very familiar with, Al.
Well, yes, I got to know Dean through the nation's Ninth of Av and our connection with the Altar of Prayer, which is a 24/7 Zoom prayer call that's been going on for 2 years now. Dean is originally from Ontario, Canada, and a couple of years ago moved to Kansas City to connect with the International House of Prayer and to help Mike Bickle in fulfill the vision of raising up 100 million intercessors for Israel. And that is happening even as we are recording this right now. We're in the midst of a 3-week period of fasting and prayer for Israel called the Isaiah 62 Fast and Global Assembly. 5 million Christians worldwide and counting who are praying continuously. They are praying for Christians and the nations, what we are supposed to be doing according to prophecy in bringing the restoration of all Israel and the final redemption of Israel and all nations. In other words, as you'll hear throughout this 3-part interview, there is an awakening in the church to the fact that we are intimately connected with Israel. Now, many of our Christian brethren are still seeing Israel as the Jewish people and only the Jewish people. That's fine. They're understanding now that we who have pledged allegiance to Israel's Messiah, Jesus as they know him, Yeshua as they are coming to know him, we've got a job description in coming from the nations to bring God's people home, to go with them up to Jerusalem, to seek the Lord of hosts. All these are prophecies that you and I have talked about, B'nai Yosef North America has talked about. And by the way, as you'll hear, Dean Bai with Return Ministries and with the Aliyah Return Center and with the Altar of Prayer and now with the Isaiah 62 Fast and IHOP KC, he knows this and he's been living it out for 3 decades, he and his family. Now, in this first part, I asked Dean to explain how he got into this business. Well, business, ministry. He was a businessman. But it was one of those unexpected God things that called his attention to Israel and the Jewish people. And, you know, he will tell you he's made some mistakes along the way, but he will also tell you that God's grace is sufficient. And that is why he and those he partnered with in the 90s were instrumental in helping Jews from the former Soviet Union make Aliyah. And how in the early 2000s, they established the Aliyah Return Center in Tiberias on the Sea of Galilee and continue to help Jews make a return. So I would encourage our listeners, take a look at Return Ministries and see what they're doing, what they're involved with. And go to the Aliyah Return Center as well. You'll see those web links in the description to this podcast. And also, I would encourage you, come to the Altar of Prayer and join with intercessors around the world who are praying for Israel with a humble heart that the Lord is shaping even now to reflect his heart for the restoration of both houses of Israel, our reunion, and our finally being made one in Messiah's hands. So with that as introduction, let's go on out to Kansas City and meet Dean Bai. Well, welcome to another interview segment with Reunion Roadmap. This is Al McCarn. Today, I have the great pleasure and privilege of interviewing my brother and fellow intercessor for Israel, Dean Bai of Aliyah Return Center and Return. And Dean, what else are you involved in?
Well, Return Ministries is really probably the groundswell of everything else that works out of our ministry. It really began out of a call and an encounter with God in 1990, because quite honestly, I never had any concept of Israel being my destiny, or the Jewish people. I was just a little itty bitty entrepreneur doing my thing in Canada, and I met God, and I met him in a very powerful way. It was a 180-degree turn. It just so happened to be happening after the Berlin Wall had dropped and communism was about to fall. And together we began to watch an exodus of Jews that we had not seen since the exodus out of Egypt in numbers, coming out of the former Soviet Union into Eastern Europe. And ultimately, it would mean over 1 million Jews would make their prophetic return to the promised land of Eretz Israel. And when I started reading scriptures after my encounter with God, because I sensed that he was asking me to be a part of this, and like, I don't read the Bible, okay? I went to church, but that didn't mean I read the Bible. So the long and the short of things is, I began. It was Jeremiah 16:16, actually the whole chapter, but it begins to really have impact when it says there'll come a day where the Israelites will no longer say that the God is the God who took them out of the land of Egypt. That's when Moses did his big thing. But they will say he's the God who took them out of the land of the north and all the countries to which he banished them.
Yes.
Well, it's sort of like I'm reading the newspaper and I'm looking at my Bible and I'm going, how can life ever be the same if I live as a husband, a father, and a businessman? How can I'm living in an hour that some prophet spoke about, almost 3,000 years earlier. And of course, as I started to read the other prophets, I'm going, my God, they all talk about a return and a restoration of a land and a people called Israel. And I was always curious. I grew up, my dad had a Jewish boss. My doctor was Jewish. My dentist was Jewish. Now I'm a young man. My accountants, my lawyers are all Jewish. And all of a sudden I'm reading in the New Testament that I'm supposed to make these people jealous. Isn't that a sin? Romans 11:11. I've since found out that there's more to that word than jealous or envy. Which is another discussion. But I realized that there is only one verse in the entire Bible that tells me word for word why I have been saved, okay? And it's been saved to make another people zealous for their God. It's like, how can I do anything else but live for the destiny I have found myself in? And so, I was immediately doing whatever research I could find to see what I could do. And before you know it, we're connected with works and ministry overseas. And before you know it, I'm on a board putting an international group together. I would lose all my businesses through this process. The reality, my obsession for living for the call and the destiny I had, I made a lot of poor decisions. I can't say I walked with a lot of wisdom, but his mercy is great. It was the best thing that ever happened because it meant I had to trust God instead of what I could do and what I was good at doing. But I drew my entire family into it. My family, my wife, my children. We began to be itinerant because it's one thing to know that you're called. Isaiah 49, verse 22 says, the sovereign Lord beckons to the Gentiles, to the nations, by oath, with his outstretched arm, to bring his children home. But he's using Gentiles. He's calling the nations to bring them home in their arms and the shoulders and so on. I'm going, my God, I got a part in this story. And again, having a drama background, when the director gives you a script, the first thing you do is you look for your part, look for your lines, you determine your actions. What are you going to wear? When do you go on stage? When do you get off stage? I began to read the Bible with the sense that the director of directors gave me a part in his story. And I realized that my part was not a Jewish part. I'm from the nations. But however, I somehow get adopted into this amazing family. So I wanted to learn what the family does. I realized that they celebrate a different Sabbath than I knew. It began Friday night and ended sundown Saturday. That was fresh and new to me. But I mean, this is an exciting thing for me. Okay.
Yes.
When you've asked me to look back on my life and how did it get me to where I am today, it began to get a revelation that the Jesus that I celebrated or knew, well, somewhat, never really lived for him, was Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
And that his return is a city called Jerusalem. And this is a mountain that's earthly. There's a geographic presence for it on the earth. It was just like everything got turned upside down. All the traditions I had, I realized that I didn't have to keep anymore. That's not popular amongst others around me. But so now I realized I had to teach, I had to educate, I had to understand myself to be able to teach others. I had to go to Israel, and I realized, hey, the best way to do this is bring others. And I want to bring the leaders, okay? And so I began, that's a story in itself, but often 2-3 groups a year, many of them pastors. I watched lives change with 10 days experiencing Israel, not from going to see what Jesus did. I mean, that's nice and it's fun and it's romantic. And for some, I've now done it. But to be able to go there to see what he's doing now and to realize that I have a part in this story. I want to learn it, and I want to learn it to a place of excellence. I want to teach it to others, and I want to be a part of it. So that led to, we brought thousands of Jews home in the 90s. We paid off their debts. Sometimes $25 was the difference between them looking at an application for the law of return, which is given to Jewish people so that they can make their aliyah, the ability to make their return back to the land of Israel. So we would help that. Then we would get them on a bus, Christian buses, and we would bring them sometimes 16, 24 hours away from an international airport. And there the Jewish agency would take over and help them go home. It was done. By 2003, I was realizing that my relationship has not been with a lot of Jewish people. In fact, it was somewhat troubling. And more than that, was even more concerning to me was that I could show up and do a conference or be in your church, and I would see you get the revelation. But sadly, I might come back 3 years later, and I'm wondering why it didn't impact you to begin to change your lifestyle, because that's what happened to me. Everything changed. Marriage, family, what I did. There wasn't anything in my life that didn't be touched by the revelation of what time I was living in. And that shocked me. Now, I had the benefit that I had people discipling me. There were people that were anxious to help me understand what I needed to understand. There were Messianic congregations. There were people that wanted to disciple me, wanted to pray for me day and night. I had that benefit, and I thank God for that. And when I think, even as I'm talking to you, I'm so grateful for the men and the women the Lord put in my life in those early 90s. But I realized that the aspect of being discipled was something I have benefited from, but is seemingly has been a lost art in the ecclesia, in the church. It's not a priority. It's show up at the meeting, but the actual make yourself accountable 7 days a week to not only the Lord, but even to others. So by 2003, we established Return Ministries. We set it up as a community. It was inviting people, especially young people or young in heart, that sensed a call to be discipled in what God was doing with Israel and the Jewish people day and night. It meant understanding the feasts of the Lord, not so that we would be religious about it, but if I'm going to identify with the Jews, I need best understand and identify with what they do in a day or a night. I felt a sense and a call that there are 6 million Jews in North America that also needed to go home. Not just those from the north and the former Soviet Union, or those in Ethiopia and the other 100 such nations that they've already returned from, but there are 6 million Jews living on the continent you and I are right now. Mm-hmm. So this began the priority of Return Ministries. But it wasn't just helping them home. And by the way, we're not helping thousands home now. It's one family at a time. Things really slowed down in that department. In fact, talking about Aliyah to a Jew living in Israel as compared to one who's living in New York City, very different impact. Sometimes it's offensive. Sometimes they might even think I'm being anti-Semitic. You're trying to get rid of me? So a whole different learning curve was necessary, and a teaching curve for the people, especially that live on this continent. And what would it take for the Jewish people to return? That ultimately put a high intensity on prayer and intercession. Now, it was always at the beginning, always had weekly, daily watches. But now we were doing them in the night. And now I was encouraging people to, we every Friday night we would do it. And I realized the more I encouraged prayer and intercession, I saw God move in the works I got to be a part of. That developed in establishing a ministry in Israel. You talked about the Aliyah Return Center, which is up in the Galilee, which it wasn't enough just to help the Jewish people home. But I realized, especially for North Americans, it's a much tougher work to stay in Israel, okay? You might make Aliyah, but learning the language. I'll never forget a doctor out of Boston. She says, 12 years post-secondary education, the hardest course I've ever had to take was learning my Hebrew. And the Russians, I'll tell you, they pick it up so much easier. Us North Americans, we're still trying to learn English, some of us. So the reality is, I began to establish work. I'm grateful. All my kids have been brought up this way. Before you know it, you have a daughter exercising faith and going to university in Israel. Before you know it, she meets Soldier Boy. Before you know it, she has a husband. I have a partner in ministry in Israel, Chaim Mailspin. And so he helped establish the Aliyah Return Center along with others that were around us, including an Orthodox Jew, Udi. Some beautiful beginnings, which helped us realize the importance of developing relationships with religious Jews, studying with them. Since 2009, barely a week goes by that I'm not studying with other Orthodox Jews in something called Enom. And your viewers can go to enom.org. They're welcome to join us on a Sunday afternoon. We study the weekly Parsha. And what's fun is, we're dealing with people who know their Hebrew roots, okay? They are living in an environment that's Israel. The majority of the Jews are with us. We have others that are also from America, but unbelievable what we're able to learn. And what's fun is they're teaching us the Torah in the New Testament, okay, to the extent that in recent time, we've just doing some elephant teachings. And if they go to our webpage at return.co.il, they'd be able to see some of these. We study the book of Romans together, but looking at some of the texts that Paul quotes Torah in, how does it relate to Romans 11:11? And I have found that the more I've been able to gain revelatory understanding by coming together, it's pushing forward, it's advancing the Gula, the redemption, learning how to, like doing things with UL and the 9th of Av, learning how to mourn. You've been an inspiration to learning how to mourn with the Jewish people. This is critical. Paul taught you need to be as a Jew with a Jew. Well, that's different than being a Greek with the Greeks. And that takes a commitment to say, I'm not going to go to one meeting and learn this one night. I'm going to let my life learn this. This will be my life mission, is to learn my call, my destiny, and relate to the people God's asked me to relate to, and teach the others that have a sense of calling to be a part of it. So this is, so I'm very grateful to the 9th of Av and others such as yourself that have helped me and what you're doing, especially when we can do it from a place of love, and giving dignity to the Jewish people, giving respect. And, because I realized that I grew up with the Great Commission, and I realized the Great Commission doesn't work the way I think I've been taught.
Here is Laura Metzing with You Alone, a selection from her debut album, Instrument of Worship.
Never let the songs I sing be just words on a page. Now I write a song for you. Here's what comes to mind. You alone are worthy. You alone deserve all praise. You alone are worthy. You alone deserve all praise. When I think about the angels standing at your throne, then I say, what could I sing to a holy God? You alone are worthy. You alone deserve all praise. You alone are worthy. You alone deserve all praise. You alone are worthy.
So welcome to the Midrash portion of Reunion Roadmap. This is a production of B'nai Yosef North America, and I'm David Jones. I'm here in Tampa, Florida, and I'm talking to another one of the elders here with B'nai Yosef North America, Barry Phillips, who is in Virginia. And we've got some things we want to talk about today, but I want to encourage you that if you have questions or ideas or things you just want to pose out for Midrash, please contact us and let us know what's on your mind, because we want to hear from you. Okay. So this week we want to talk a little bit about Daniel and how Daniel was in exile, but he was still a very godly man. He still retained the character of Yahweh and was still able to serve even though he was somewhere else. And it's kind of here in America, we think that's difficult to be Torah observant because we're in America. How does that fit in our lives? What do you think, Barry?
Well, I think Daniel is one that he was taken out of his homeland and probably in his teen years, and we also have to remember that Yehuda was taken into exile because of their failure. So society for Daniel was in a degenerate spiritual decline atmosphere. And yet he had managed somehow to retain extreme levels of value in serving Yahweh. He found himself in exile and was compelled and maybe even we could say driven to be sure that he remained cognizant of what's clean and unclean, refusing to eat the king's meat, to the point of putting his life in jeopardy. And he had these extreme values, these solid, rock solid values instilled in him, even though he came from a society that had fallen apart from the Torah so far that they went into judgment. I just find that fascinating, that as a young man, somehow he had this level of focus and awareness of what the Torah would require of him, that he put his life in jeopardy in exile to remain faithful to what Yah had called him to do. We talk about living in exile. How about living in the land of promise and it falling apart?
Wow. We don't have to think about it in that way. He was there. I mean, the promise was there, and they were sent off and brought away. And even in that, when we suffer something really hard, sometimes it's hard to hold on to our faith. But Daniel, man, what faith. And he held on to that. And it makes me think of the Shema, really, because here, the importance of teaching it to your children. Daniel was a young man when he got taken away. And so to have that in his heart was very important, and to teach it to the next generation. I feel that I see glimmers of hope, because I see some areas where the next generation, some of the younger children and some in their teens are really coming to a place of being Torah observant and loving Yahweh with all their heart. So they are seeing how these two things do not conflict.
So what is it that, in your estimation, is foundational for faithfulness? What is it that we have to do on a consistent basis? I mean, Daniel doesn't just show up at highlighted moments out of the blue, having never prepared himself. He had a consistent walk behind the written pages that we have in his book. If we're talking to someone who says, well, it's difficult, I'm struggling to remain faithful, what do you do? What are the life disciplines that you use for faithfulness in your estimation?
Wow, that really says a lot. I think one thing is a matter of lifeline. Relationship is key in our heart and our attitude with Yahweh, because we have to maintain that. So I think prayer is a very big factor, and I think knowing the Word is also a big factor. Because when we know the word, it increases our faith. It builds our faith. So we got to make sure we stay in it, and we have to make sure that we pray. And these two things go hand in hand and go together. Although these are not the only two things, but I think these two things are very important in any person's walk, in any person's life, to maintain that continuity, faithfulness.
Okay, so let's focus on prayer for a second, David. We're in a land of exile. And, I've heard it taught, and I practice this a great deal, about praying toward Jerusalem, looking toward the east. And, Shlomo at the dedication of the temple said that when we're in exile, if we would become aware of our sins and repent, make teshuvah, and turn back toward this place. Well, I understand that this place is no longer there. It won't be there for a while, probably at this point. But we're looking toward Jerusalem. We're crying out to him, facing the place where his name is placed in the earth. We still sometimes feel like, but I'm in exile. I'm out of the land. I'm not highly skilled at keeping the commands. How do we have confidence that our prayer is being effectively heard and that Yah hears us when we're not there yet? Sometimes we can so look forward to what is coming and the kingdom, etc., that we belittle the situation and the state that we're in at the moment. But does he not hear us effectively now, even though we're still in exile at this moment?
That's pretty intense. I do feel he does hear us, because we even read, like when they were in Egypt, and it says that God heard their cries, and so they cried out to him, and now was the time for him to act on behalf of the promise that he had given to them. And so I think that the Father hearing us, I don't believe it's so much conditional upon our circumstances, I think, or the things that we may be going through at the time, as it is to say, here I am, and I'm not perfect, but I'm yours. And everything that I've got, and all I want is to serve you, Yahweh, and to be there. And I believe that heart attitude will keep us constantly hearing from him and able to move in that directions that he desires. And he desires restoration, does he not?
Yeah.
And what was Daniel praying for? I mean, again, I believe Daniel was praying to be restored back home, and for the people to be restored, and for the righteous reign in Jerusalem. And shouldn't we be praying for the same things?
So let's ask this question: what constitutes prayer? Is it these well-rehearsed and practiced phrases that we tie together in a seamless fashion so that we smoothly and eloquently lay out this supplication to him, even using big words like supplication? But is prayer not sometimes just a groan? Just a weeping or a groaning or a travailing? When you mentioned those that were in Egypt, in Mitzrayim, and they cried out, what were they vocalizing? Was that a yell for help? Were they screaming at the heavens in desperation? Or were they just crying out because of the sting of the whip? When they yelped or cried out or in anguish and in pain as the Egyptian whips were laid on their back, is that prayer? Was Yah interpreting those painful cries as prayer? When we groan, that we hear of a young lady police officer, a young lady getting stabbed, and she bleeds to death and dies in Jerusalem, guarding the city. And we weep and we cry out, why, Yah, why? Is that prayer? Does he hear that as prayer? Is that a cry that will end our exile when we become broken? I think it is. Yes, if you can verbalize something and state something, I think that's highly effective. but sometimes it's just the groan of the soul that words do not form around.
Hey, Barry, isn't that what it says in Romans? That there are times when we just don't have the words, or just even so overwhelmed with what we're experiencing, we just can't form a word. It's just a cry out. It's just a being there and just throwing ourselves before Him and just not being able to do the words to speak. Does He not hear our heart?
Well, yeah, I believe He does. And and I've heard people often say to me in some kind of dire circumstance, I don't know how to pray. I don't know what to pray. And when I come to that place, David, I just tell Him, Father, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to express what's going on here. And we get into prayer meetings and so forth, and sometimes we hear people tell Yah what we already know that He knows. We're not giving Him any information that He's not already aware of. So sometimes our prayer is just stating the need. But in addition to that, we have to be mindful to ask, I need your help. I can't fix this. I'm willing to be a part of the resolve of this, but I can't fix this. I need your power displayed. I need your hand moving. And when Daniel was praying, he had to, I believe, not only bring the need of his people in exile before the Father and ask that He would keep them and that He would germinate in them a yearning to return. I mean, they had obviously gotten so enamored with and at home with the society in Babylon that when the time came to go home, most of them stayed. So Daniel needed to pray, Father, keep us, enable us to be effective here. Let us be a solid witness of your Torah and your commands, your witness of who you are here, but never let us forget going home. Rav Shaul wrote to the Thessalonians in chapter 1 Thessalonians 4. He said, make it your ambition to live peaceably and to attend to your own and to work with your own hands as we commanded you, so that you behave decently toward those who are outside and not be in any need. Live a quiet, peaceable life. There's nothing wrong with that. But we have to pray, I think, in praying for Jerusalem, praying for our brother Yehuda, it germinates in us a yearning and a longing for that which is to come. We can never let go of the coming kingdom and the inheritance of the land for His people. That has to be something that is constantly fostered in our heart.
Yeah, very well said. I think that Sha'alu Shalom Yerushalayim is something we need to keep in front of us, and pray, and what we're looking for peace in Jerusalem. I think what we're really looking for, because in this world, do you think we're ever really going to have peace in Jerusalem? I think when Moshiach comes, we will have peace in Jerusalem, and until then, that is still our prayers and my summation. What do you think? We're closing in. We just got about a minute or so left here. And what do you think should be our prayer versus like what Daniel was praying for?
Versus maybe the same thing.
Yeah.
Daniel prayed consistently, even under the threat of death. He constantly prayed, and we have to be aware that when we pray for return, for the end of exile, for restoration, for the coming of the kingdom and the return of the Messiah, we're also opening the door for the footsteps of the Messiah. Those days of travail, Yaakov's trouble. We have to be prepared in our minds for endurance and perseverance in order for that kingdom to come. So,
and may His kingdom come. Yeah. Here we are. That's what we're looking for here on earth. And May that be our prayer. May that be our cry. Well, we're out of time, Barry. So I guess until next time, we'll talk again.
Enjoyed it much, David. Thanks.
From Laura Metzing, this is Close to You from her album Instrument of Worship.
Abba, hear my prayer. Draw me to your side. My hands are stretched wide, praising you most high. I wanna be close to you. I wanna be close to Sometimes you feel so far away. I know by faith I can see your hand is guiding me. Oh, how I wanna believe that I can be close to you. 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 Abba, hear my prayer. Draw me to your side. My hands are stretched wide, praising you most high. I wanna be close to you. I wanna be close to you. I wanna be close to you. Close to you. Close to you.
Well, that was Laura Metzing. She is a new artist and has just released her first album, Instrument of Worship. And she's got a YouTube channel, so just look her up, and you can also find her on Facebook, Laura Metzing. And now, before that, we heard David and Barry with a midrash, which they called Daniel and Exile. It seems to me, Stefania, that their discussion on Daniel and the exile, that has a connection with what we were hearing from Dean By. Now, I will apologize to the audience. This first segment of Dean's interview ended on a cliffhanger. As he was talking about the Great Commission, So that just means you're going to have to come back to next week's podcast and see where he picks that up. But I can tell you what Dean realized with the Great Commission is that there's a whole lot more to it than just making disciples and personal salvation through the gospel that the church has proclaimed and rightly proclaimed over the last 2,000 years. There's much more to it than that. So, Stefania, I'm going to give you the relatively easy task of linking together this Great Commission cliffhanger with what Barry and David are saying about Daniel and the exile.
Well, sometimes when we think about, like they were both talking about, is this idea of exile. Okay, you might want to put it akin to in prison or whatever, but it does not mean that you're in a place where that the Father's not going to use you and you're not going to be active in your service to Him. And I think to link the two is that is exactly what the Father was speaking to Dean about, being active in his service to Him where he was at.
Yes.
And he was obedient to that call, and the Father, you'll find out in this interview how He has guided him into his current place of what he's doing, and that's exactly, you see Daniel, even though he was in exile, what was Daniel known for? An intercessor. And in fact, to the point is that his intercession had such a devotion to prayer that it got him thrown into a lion's den. And what was the result there? Well, he was a man of faith, and he was covered.
Yeah. If we are speaking among ourselves as B'nai Yosef North America, with our understanding of our identity of the house of Joseph,
yes,
we could talk about our exile,
yeah,
and how we don't even know who we are. We don't know what kingdom we belong to. If I'm talking in Christian terms, there's still an exile understanding, because all the time that I'm growing up in church and serving as a deacon and Sunday school teacher and whatnot, I'm realizing the kingdom of heaven isn't quite here yet, because we are still living in a fallen, broken world.
yes.
If anything, the message of the two houses of Israel has helped me put some more definition to that understanding.
Yeah.
We are living in a fallen, broken world where God's covenant peoples are not yet, first of all, cooperating together, because up until now, we have not recognized each other as part of the covenant. So we're continuing to deal with the brokenness of this world in isolation from one another, and often contributing to the difficulties that each other faces. I know that very well with having studied the history of Christians with Jews. And you know that as well.
Yeah.
That's a past that we are wrestling with and reaching out to our Jewish partners to help build a better future.
Yeah.
A future which we know is a kingdom future.
Yeah.
This is why I'm so glad to work with people like Dean Bai and with the rest of his family and others like him, because even though we don't agree exactly on the details, we do understand that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has called us to this restoration and redemption process. It seems to me we've reached the fullness of time for something big. And I am excited to see what's happening in days to come with Christian-Jewish relations, or Joseph and Judah relations, however you want to put it. Well, that's it for this edition of Reunion Roadmap. We do hope you've enjoyed the show, and we hope you'll visit our website, BneiYosefNA.com, BneiYosefNA.com, BneiYosefNA.com. Check out our resources, sign up for our newsletter. We even have a donate button if you are moved to partner with us in that way. So on behalf of Stefania Pappas and David Jones and Barry Phillips, This is Al McCarn. Shavua Tov.
Thank you for joining us on Reunion Roadmap, a production of B'nai Yosef North America. Please come back next week for another visit with the people of the emerging house of Joseph here in North America.